this idea that he was standing up for freedom of speech. At the same time, he was a drug addict. He was married to a former or current stripper. He was a very complicated, incredible, hilarious person. And that started my fascination with knowing a lot about comedians, how they work, and what their lives are like. So in some ways, I always felt like all this reading and watching was programming me for my eventual attempts to create my own comedy. When I was in the end of junior high school, my parents got divorced, and it was a very painful divorce. They fought literally from 8th grade till I was in college. It was one of those situations where it never got settled. It never calmed down. And my mom moved out, and my parents had owned a restaurant, and the owner of this comedy club on Long Island in Southampton was a guy named Rick Messina, and he used to be the bartender at my parents' restaurant. So when my parents got divorced, my mom took a job as the hostess at this comedy club. And that's when I first saw comedians. I would go to every show all summer long at the East End Comedy Club in Southampton. And I saw people like Paul Provenza and Jay Leno. And that's when I knew, oh, this is what I want to do. I'd like to be a stand-up comedian. But I didn't think I could tell anybody. So I kept it a secret. And years later, I thought about how my mom really didn't have any money at the time, and she took this job, and how much could she have gotten paid to do it? How much do you get paid to seat people at a comedy club? $50? $75? This is the early 80s. And then it occurred to me that this was, whether consciously or unconsciously, a gift to me. That on some level, if you think of the world as making any sense at all, or the universe is giving gifts or advice or supporting you, my mom wanted me to be able to go to that comedy club. And that's what lit the fuse on the whole thing, was the fact that she took this job, which couldn't have been a great job, but that was the door in to really watch comedians. The next thing I thought was, how can I talk to these comedians? I've just gotten to watch them. I want to talk to them. So I had a high school radio station, which was called WKWZ at Syosset High School. And my friend Josh Rosenthal used to go interview bands. And he would go interview REM or X in the early 80s. And one day we were talking, and he claims it was his suggestion. I'll give it to him. He said, you should interview comedians. So the first person I interviewed was a comedian named J.J. Wall, who was famous as one of the great MCs at the height of the success of Catch a Rising Star in New York, and he later went on to be one of the great sitcom writers. So I interviewed him for the radio station, and then I decided to start a show called Club Comedy, and I started interviewing comedians. And the only reason why I did it was because I wanted to meet them, and I wanted to ask them, how do you do it? How do you get in? That was how obsessed I was, as I created a show that no one on earth listened to. I didn't even air almost any of the interviews. They were just for me. So I very quickly interviewed Steve Allen, and then I interviewed Sandra Bernhard, and then I decided to hunt down as many of the original writers from Saturday Night Live as possible. So I interviewed Alan Zweibel and Don Novello, who did Guido Sarducci, and Harry Shearer, and on and on and on. And one of the highlights for me was interviewing Gary Shandling right after he hosted The Tonight Show for the first time. So I've been making a documentary about Gary Shandling, and one of the good interviews of Gary when he was young was done by me when I was 16 years old. But I had these opportunities to sit with people like Jay Leno or Jerry Seinfeld.